Welcome to another Disability Rights Michigan interview. I'm Simon Zagata, Disability Rights Michigan staff attorney and social media coordinator. The conversation you're about to listen to is an interview that I did with Dominick Evans, recorded in July. Dominick is an actor, director, producer, and self-advocate, and we talk about disability representation in the media, their work in media, and disability pride. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Dominick as much as I did.
Hello. It's so good to be here, Simon, because you've actually helped me in Michigan. You've actually been my lawyer, helping me navigate home care. So, I mean, you have personal experience with me.
Yeah, definitely. And I help clients obviously, whether I enjoy working with them or not. But you were really good to work with and someone who made it, you know, you do a ton of self-advocacy, and our philosophy here is always what the client wants. So you made it really, really easy to identify what the issues were and how to overcome them.
I'm really glad to hear you say that because I think self-advocacy is a process. And I would say when I was younger, and this is my advice to younger disabled people, especially, is don't give up because I didn't know what I was doing. I basically ended up on my own when my dad died and I had to navigate the system. So don't give up. There are systems out there that can help you. And Disability Rights Michigan was one of the systems for me that helped me on my path. But I don't think, 20 years ago, I would know what I was doing. I wouldn't know where to go. So don't be afraid if you're scared or you don't know where to go. It's a process of learning how to advocate for yourself.
Learning to advocate for yourself is a process, but I know that learning to act and getting into acting and media is a process as well. How did that journey get started for you?
What further progressed was that I had an accident where I fell out of my shower chair. And that was when I really moved to Michigan for the first time. I had to leave school. I didn't finish my degree in theater. And I moved with my girlfriend, who is still my girlfriend. This was back in 2003. So it's been quite some time since I first moved to Michigan. And I lived here for 10 years. Or wait, was it 10? No, 7 years. I lived here for 7 years. And then I decided to go back to that school again, which was in Ohio, Wright State, and get a film degree. So while I was here in Michigan, I did more acting. I went to University of Michigan Flint for a year where I was in theater. And that was really great too, because I got to do a lot of classic theater like Shakespeare and Greek tragedy and Commedia dell'arte. That was so fun doing Commedia dell'arte along the Flint River as like improv was just, it was a blast, and then to really have people see, there's this disabled person who's funny and can perform and act. That was really great because that was never the thing. People never told me you're not talented. They always told me you'll never get anywhere because you're disabled. It was always, it's so sad you're so talented because you're disabled. So but going to film school was really what got me into all the filmmaking. When I was there, we were talking about representation, and it was about LGBT representation. It was about other marginalized communities being represented, but disability was nowhere. And I went to my professor, who was the head of the department, and I said, will you sponsor a independent study into disability representation in film? And she was like, heck yeah, let's do it. Yeah. So we did it. And it was really eye-opening for me. I knew it was bad, the representation. I knew I didn't ever see myself represented, and I knew that I didn't feel represented,
Mhm.
but the numbers just don't lie. It was abysmal. And I knew then and there that I had to do something to change it, because this was why I wasn't included. This was why I was considered, good for a disabled person as an actor. And I wanted to change that. And the more I studied, the more I also realized that representation is extremely tied to how we're treated. And that if we want to make any changes to disabled people at all, we must start with representation, because that's how we as a society learn about that which we don't understand. We're heavily imbued in media. Just even walking down the street, you see a million advertisements surround you. What do those people look like? Are they a part of your community? Do they look like you? Just even that can tell you, do you belong? Because you don't see yourself in this world you live in, represented in the advertising and in the media around you. So the more I learned about that, the more it became my life's work and mission. And my girlfriend is a screenwriter, and she naturally progressed to being a part of this world. And now we're considered two of the leading experts on disability representation in the world, particularly referring to television, though we are quite knowledgeable on film, video game representation, and other forms of media.
You said you were working. What are you working on right now?
Right now, I am working on our study into disability representation on television. I am the co-creator of a study that we usually do annually, but this year we're doing a special pandemic edition, because the pandemic really kind of messed with the television schedules and whatnot. So we're doing a 2-year study right now, which we hope to have everything watched by the end of the year so we can release at the beginning of next year. So right now I'm watching a lot of television, because we watch every show, every episode of every show that we include in our study. For our first study, that was 150 shows between two people. For our second study, that was 180. And now I don't even know what our number will be, because we're watching 2 seasons of some shows. So it's a huge amount of work for 2 people to do.
Yeah,
that's just one project I'm working on, though. I'm also working on really between 4 and 5 different pilot scripts for television. They're all in various states of finished or getting there. One of them, we have a pilot completely finished. It's been we've had people read it and check it out, and we feel it's like ready to send to the networks and whatnot. It's pretty much at that point. We're just developing our show Bible, our show deck, basically, which is used kind of like to advertise your show to the network. So that's really all we have for that. The other shows, I have one where I'm in world development, because it's a sci-fi series, so everything's being created kind of from scratch. That takes a lot. We've been world creating for over a year right now. It's been really exciting. And then we have another one where the pilot script is half written, and another one where we're kind of still deciding where to go with the show. So we have 4 to 5 different scripts that we're working on as well. So those have been the really big projects that I've been working on, but I also get emails all the time asking me to do little projects like people want me to talk about marriage equality for disabled people because I've been one of the leading voices in that movement for, over a decade. So stuff like that is like little things I do, but really these big projects are what I'm working on right now.
Gotcha. And I mean, that just, it scrambles my head a little bit thinking about the amount of TV that is, plus writing on top of it. What's the goal of that study or that, series of studies that you're doing?
So I believe that the reason why, well, not the only reason, there's many reasons why disabled people experience ableism and discrimination, but I largely believe that the media contributes to that. We know for a fact that with other marginalized groups like the LGBT community, we know for a fact that representation impacts how we're treated. It impacts everything from how you're treated down to the kind of legislation that's passed about you. So if we know this happens to other communities, it's only logical to assume that that is also part of why the disabled community is so mistreated. And my research really kind of feeds into the narrative that, yes, it supports that narrative. What we've learned from our first two studies, which are available at filmdisc.com, by the way. You can check them out in multiple formats for accessibility. But what it has confirmed is that, yes, society looks to media for how to treat disabled people. So if we're not responsible with that media, then we can't fix things. If we had better representation that was more inclusive and that did not paint disabled people as burdens or problems or some other negative thing, I truly believe that disabled people would be treated better. So we do the study first to hold Hollywood responsible. We say, because we know everything. So I don't think people understand how involved our study is, because we break everything down by the characters. I can tell you everything about the state of disability on television, and by extension, what happens in other media, because if it's happening on television, we also know it's happening in film, it's happening in gaming, and just other forms of media. So looking at this as a model, I can tell you the state of disabled characters based on race, gender identity, what type of character they are. Are they like a lead character? Are they an extra? Are they a bit part? What their nationality is. We know everything about these characters, so we can say, one, what is lacking? And what we see lacking is that representation is primarily white, it's primarily male, it's primarily focused on messages where the disabled person isn't even the intended protagonist. A lot of times the stories about disability are about how disabled people impact other people that are not disabled. So knowing all this stuff will help us improve representation. If the networks were listening to us, looking at our study, taking it seriously, they would start making changes. So that's really where we're getting started, is putting pressure on the networks, because they hold all the power. The other thing with all of this is that we're creating our own television, because we know how to do it in a way that's less harmful. When we tell people to do things, we say practice what you preach. So if we're going to preach that representation can be better, why not show that it can be better? And I think it will. We've had some really good feedback on our first script. And one of the things people keep saying is it's just effortlessly inclusive, because when you think about inclusion, not as like a number, which is what Hollywood is proving. That's something interesting about the study that I'm going to digress on in a minute, is that Hollywood is all about numbers, but we can't think about representation as numbers. We're people, we're human beings, and numbers are impacting our integrity, our ability to live safe lives, you know. So getting Hollywood to see they can't just make diversity something that, you know, they can tally on a board is a huge part of all of it. Getting them to see that they can do better and that the content is good too. You know, we're not trying to just make something that's inclusive. We want it to be really good, entertaining media that tells a story and that shows that disabled people have talent and can be talented when we're allowed to be included.
Yeah, and just you're talking about numbers, you know, and quality of content just makes me think it's sort of in a logical thought, I guess, to think that something with disability representation won't be as successful, or disabled actors won't be as successful, just because for years, decades, however long, networks have expected disabled people, who make up a huge portion of the population, to look at abled actors and abled people and abled storylines and find them interesting. And no one has complained about the overall level of entertainment. So then why, you know, there's no reason the level of entertainment would drop or the storylines would be less interesting with disabled people.
Absolutely. And so the thing that I wanted to digress on is this. The fact that oh, hang on, give me a minute. I knew what I was going to say and then it flew out of my brain. Give me a minute. Oh yeah. So what I wanted to digress on just a minute ago is the fact that I can show that Hollywood literally uses a tally card. At first, so when we did our first study, I thought, this is a really unusual pattern I see, because what we saw was that it looked like the amount of non-white disabled representation was almost equal to number by number, right? Mm-hmm. So the first study, I thought, oh, that's just weird, right? Well, the second study, this is going to blow your mind, because it blew my mind. When we break it down by everything. So I can say we had this many disabled characters, and this many were white, this many were black, this many were, you know, indigenous and other people of color. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's how we break it down. Well, what I found was that the number of Black men and Black women were one number off. We're talking 100 and 101 were the number of Black men and Black women that were disabled out of over 1,000 disabled characters. Now, mind you, we're only talking about 100 of each, you know, male and female. And also it follows a binary, by the way. But that was weird, right? I was like 101 and 100. Are you kidding me? But then when you looked at all the other non-white people, indigenous people, and other people of color, we're talking, you know, people from India, we're talking Latina people, Asian people. Do you want to guess what I found?
Yeah, I'm guessing that you know, on the binary male female, they for those different groups, I'm guessing that they all line up.
They were identical. 79. 79. We tallied the number multiple times because we were just blown away. And I said, how could they not have a little board with a tally card saying, oh, we got our Asian disabled person. Oh, we got our Latina disabled person. We got our Black disabled person. They're literally using a tally card. Nobody can tell me any different.
We've got 65 more to go.
Exactly. You can't cast that way. You can't and have it be good. And we're seeing the integrity of Hollywood failing right now, because right now what we're seeing is they need shows. We have more streaming networks than ever, and they need content. So we're getting the crappiest content on the planet. We're getting really badly created shows. We're getting really badly created movies. And the other thing is that they're letting a very small handful of people be creators. Just look at shows like Ryan Murphy. Ryan Murphy and what is his name? Greg Berlanti. If you added up all the shows they do together, sometimes we're talking over 10 shows for one person. You know what I mean? Imagine if they let 10 diverse people, disabled people, Black and brown people, LGBT people. What would those stories look like? Because we don't get to tell our stories. You know what I mean? So we have this system where we have primarily white men running almost all the television shows. We have an excessive need for content. So, but they're not willing to look at diverse voices unless it's, every once in a while we'll get, the token. And that's what I feel like shows like Special or, anything that includes disability end up being. They're kind of the token disabled show. They give us, and they only give us enough seasons to really be like, well, we gave you a show. Can you shut up for a little while? I also think that one thing that we don't really talk about is giving the disabled community kind of a little grace to have bad representation, because when I see the path of the disabled community going kind of like the LGBT community. I grew up in the 90s when LGBT cinema was kind of emerging, and we have a lot of really bad representation, but so many of us cling to those because those were what we had. It was all we had, you know what I mean? And we can, I can look at that today and say, man, that was not the best representation, but it led to what we have today, where we're seeing trans characters and non-binary characters and gay characters that are just being people. Finally, we had to go through the decades of being defined by our gender and our sexuality and get all that crappy representation out of the way. I think we'll get there, but I think that as long as we have a lot of gatekeeping and a lot of people not really willing to support other disabled people, it's going to take our community slower, and we're going to have a lot more worse representation to go through as a result, I believe.
Yeah, and so it's clear that representation is very important to you, and that brings me back to when I originally contacted you to talk and do this interview. It was, I wanted to ask you about, or I wanted it to be, or thought it would be a disability pride interview, but you have, I think, a unique perspective, or maybe not unique, but a perspective I wasn't expecting on that. So can you explain your perspective on disability pride?
Yeah. Okay. So first, I want to get this out of the way because when you say, I'm not loving the idea of Disability Pride Month, people suddenly say, you don't support us having pride. What do you want? And, I get a lot of ableism actually, like I'm not disabled. The thing that was the big thing. Like, you want disabled people to suffer. And it's like, I am disabled. No, I don't. So I just want to make very clear. I believe that disabled people should be proud of who they are. And I think that if anybody knows my work, they know that every piece of work I do is embedded in pride in myself, pride in being disabled, and pride in showing the world that disabled people are just like anybody else. We're human. You know what I mean? So I don't think you can know my work and think that I am against the idea of being proud of who you are.
And
What I am against is what I see a predominantly white led, cis led, hetero led community taking the idea of pride and use, the LGBT idea of pride and copying things that happen because there is a group of us on Twitter. We're all marginalized in different ways, and we're all disabled. We're all multiply marginalized, and all of us have noticed people using the pride flag to advertise disability pride events. We have had people saying, that we literally have had people say they can steal from pride and that, the LGBT community just needs to get over it. To me, that is really kind of violent towards those of us that live at the intersection of disability and LGBT intersections. I think that we need to be very careful about appropriation in the disabled community. And it's hard for me to want to support things when I see that they're appropriating from other groups. So, yes, have disabled pride, be proud of who you are, celebrate. We deserve to have celebrations too. But and another thing was also that and I am not alone in this. There are multiple disabled people who are upset that they're starting in June advertising for Pride. You know what I mean? Pride for us in June is not just, it's not even just a celebration. A lot of it is really this solemn acknowledgement of a past that's really been violent and killed a lot of our community, and the disabled community should recognize that because we've had a lot of death and mistreatment too. But because the leadership has kind of ignored these intersections anyway, a lot of us living at them are feeling like pride is devaluing these intersections. That's our concern. And I want to make it, like I said, I want to make it very clear, we're not denigrating anybody who wants to celebrate their own pride. We're saying how this pride has evolved has been really problematic.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can definitely see that perspective. So do you think, you mentioned the leadership and how it's developed. Do you think it is mostly an issue of the leadership in creating, specifically Disability Pride Month, and sort of what suggestions or ideas do you have for celebrating disability pride without appropriating and potentially devaluing, the Pride Month in June, LGBT pride?
I know that a lot of non-white LGBT disabled people have talked about, why does it have to be July? I know that there's the whole ADA connection in July, you know, with the ADA signing, but a lot of us are also critical of the ADA as well, and how, you know, it doesn't go far enough, and we've been waiting for years. And, you know, even how it isn't even upheld. How many times have those of us who use wheelchairs been told, well, the ADA covers this, but our business is older than 1990, so good luck. We're still not going to include you, you know? So if it's not even upheld, you know, things got to change. Maybe that's the narrative. Maybe the narrative is we can talk about this and all the changes that need to happen. But I know that people have said, you know, there are other months that celebrate disability, like October has multiple disabled events in that. I know people are thinking about doing things in October. People are not against the idea of a disabled Pride Month. They're against the idea of doing it and appropriating it, you know, and people become really defensive when they hear that, you know. So I'm not very popular for this perspective, but it is very nuanced, and we're not trying to attack anyone. We're just saying, think about it, be intentional, don't be exclusionary, don't steal from other communities. And I think that the disabled community also doesn't understand its history with the LGBT community and how violent they've been against the LGBT community, down to excluding those with AIDS from being labeled as disabled because they didn't want people with AIDS to get Social Security or Medicaid or other services. It's a lot of really greediness by the disabled community to say, we don't want to include you, we don't want to see you as disabled because we don't want you to take resources from, you know, us that are heterosexual, cisgender, disabled people.
Yeah, and it's not just the recognition that it's not a zero-sum game, and there's going to be a lot of overlap and a lot of intersectionality between, I mean, pick your two communities, there's going to be intersectionality somehow. But it hurts both if you're trying to take from one.
That's true. And, you know, it's interesting because the disabled community, when the big problem I've seen, the discrimination for the disabled community is either, you know, we're not getting the same resources. I hear that all the time. The LGBT community gets so much attention and we don't get anything, and we need resources too. Yeah, we all need attention, but like pitting our communities against one another, that doesn't help. You know, there's a huge overlap between disability and LGBT because we know that trauma is a huge creator of disability. I've seen studies that have said, you know, the majority of LGBT people are disabled in some way, you know, as is true of a lot of the world, you know, a lot more disabled people than people even realize. So why are we basically throwing our own community under, you know, under the water?
Yeah, and you know, you said you're not very popular for expressing this, you know, this viewpoint, but for me, you know, obviously I'm not the person to lead these discussions, but just from a logical standpoint, it seems like we need to acknowledge things in order to address them. And it's better to just get them out in the open than ignore these things and these perspectives.
Absolutely. And also, if we don't talk about these things, how are they going to change and get better? And I feel like a lot of people look at my social media and see that I have a big following and say, oh, well, you're just one person, you're just one perspective. But there's a lot of people that feel the way I do. I'm not, you know, this it isn't a monolith.
So you've mentioned these projects you're working on, and scripts and pilots. I think it's safe to assume that there will be disability representation in those shows. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, of course there's going to be disability representation. For me, this is so my idea of how I would run a TV show is a bit different than how TV shows are run. For example, any script that I would write, I might not necessarily write, this character's disabled, that character's disabled, but any character that could logically be played by a disabled actor, that actor can audition for. That's the first way we start in including disabled people in Hollywood is casting practices. So all of my films, television shows, miniseries, whatever we make, those will have inclusive casting practices, not just for disability, but right now they kind of don't audition you unless they label, okay, we want this diversity, so trans actors don't get to audition for, certain roles unless they want a trans, actor brought in, for example. But for me, I don't just want that for disabled people. We will audition trans people the same way. We will audition, if you can logically play that character. And by logically, I'm going to say this because people are going to be like, well, what do you mean by logically? I'm going to say, I, as a wheelchair user, me personally, Dominick, I'm not talking for any other wheelchair users, could never play a downhill skier. I just couldn't. I can't ski. So I could not logically play that role. I wouldn't audition for that role. I could play a librarian. I could play a lawyer. I could play a clarinetist. I used to play the clarinet. I could play all these different things. But, if you could logically, and we're going to leave it up to the actor because the actor knows themselves. If they think they could audition for that role, if they believe it, then why not let them audition? This also gives disabled people and trans people and other marginalized people that don't always get the chance to audition a chance to, have more audition experiences.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like, why are you, again, just limiting the pool of, if you want the best actor or actress on your show, why are you limiting your pool of who can audition for this role when it could be played by a disabled person or an abled person?
Well, and sometimes they don't even audition. They're just like, oh, I want Kate Hudson or whatever for this role, so I'm going to give it to her. And it's like, how is that fair to any other actor? The way Hollywood is run is just very, very not good. It's not inclusive. It's not really even conducive to talent. Because if we truly wanted the best, we would let anybody audition. We'd be discovering new talent and whatnot. So casting is the first part. The other part is that, we always have at least one disabled lead character in everything we do, but we also have disabled characters throughout the productions, you know what I mean? Or the idea for it. Like, I have characters that I don't even have written that I'm envisioning that will be disabled, or there are people that I know are actors that I want to audition that are disabled that I think would be great for, you know, this idea I have or that idea I have. And that's another thing too. I don't want to just hand out roles. I expect everybody to audition too, to give people a fair shot at, you know, every role we create. So inclusion to me looks like changing the practices of how we cast and how we run our scripting.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Just to wrap up here, Dominick, do you have any final thoughts on disability pride or building community? I know you do a lot of Twitch streaming and are playing video games with people all the time online. Do you have any final thoughts on that?
For disability pride, you know what? Be proud. That's really all I have to say. You know, if you want to celebrate, but really think about how, you know, your actions impact others, just really in everything. And that's not just relating to disability pride. How can we as a society be more inclusive? How can we be less harmful to, you know, the most marginalized in our communities? How can we ensure that their voices get heard? And for me, I really want to bring other disabled people along. Me creating all this stuff is about bringing disabled actors, disabled creatives, disabled, you know, people everywhere, you know, because we belong everywhere. That was the message of the music video spaces that I directed, was that we belong in all the spaces. We belong to exist. We belong to be, we deserve to be treated like we're human beings. So be proud, because no matter how you are, you were meant to be here. If you're in this world, you're meant to be here, regardless of what anybody else says. So be proud of that at the very least, and keep trying. Never give up.